Hello, Pod Smashers of the Internet, and welcome to another episode of
80-bit Pod Smash.
That's our newscast intro, where gaming goes to grab a beer.
It's also the Sports Center intro, which should give you some sense as to what we may be talking about tonight. We are your hosts, Penguin and Termite. I am Penguin.
I am Termite, and we are a weekly video game podcast smashing together ideas that you care about with video games. And tonight we're doing
a deep dive on sports games in honor of one of the, maybe not the biggest, but one of the biggest sports holidays that is this week, which you all should be aware of, is Thanksgiving week in America.
Happy Thanksgiving!
So happy Thanksgiving. We are scraping the bottom of the barrel on Thanksgiving episodes. This may have to actually be the last proper Thanksgiving episode we do, because we did thankfulness, we did food, we did Black Friday. And so what else is there? I mean, are we going to go through the list of the hottest turkeys in video games? I guess we'll
always find something, but I'm blown away by the fact that this is our fourth Thanksgiving episode.
That is that's pretty cool. Yeah, I was thinking about that today too. I was like, 4. But yeah, so on to the list of the hottest turkeys. No, I was kidding. But we are doing, so we're doing a one of our series called Deep Dives, and we thought it fitting since football is a American Thanksgiving tradition. We decided we'd talk about sports games this week. Is a deep dive that we have been dragging our feet on because neither of us particularly love sports games.
And we don't like a specific type of sports games, but we'll get there.
We'll get there, yeah. So anyways, that leads us. We are going to be talking about that today. But before we do, we always like to start by talking about what beer we are drinking, because that is our tagline, where gaming goes to grab a beer. So what are you drinking tonight?
And you'll get more of this story with my favorite things, am drinking a Hardywood Christmas pancakes. This is their Imperial. It's so good. Oh, it's so good.
Maple, like syrup on it?
Have you had it before?
No, but it sounds really good.
Hold on. You've never had Christmas pancakes?
Not to my recollection, I should say.
So this is like, all right, Hardywood Brewing in Richmond has their crazy lineup of gingerbread stouts. They age them in all kinds of barrels. They condition them with coffee and then age them in different kinds of barrels. It gets insane. You have to have a spreadsheet to cover all the different types. But Christmas pancakes has always, over the last, I think, 2 years, this will be the third year in a row they've released it, has been like this common $6 big bottle. So it's you get more than a pint for $6, but it's not super expensive. And it's just this quiet, like over here in the corner, holiday release that there's no hype. It's not barrel aged. It's not hard to find, and it's cheap. You can get it at Giant, and it is so good and commonly overlooked. So I'll read the can. That's why I'm surprised you haven't had it, because it's everywhere. So I have 4 of them. PlayStation 5 night. You're getting one. So we're doing that.
Awesome. Great. Okay, so we're doing this.
Yes, we are. Hamilton reference confirmed. Imperial Milk Stout with spices, honey, and maple syrup. And their description on the can is Hardywood Christmas Pancakes takes our gingerbread stout out for breakfast. We intensify our already decadent gingerbread stout with gallons of local maple syrup for a sweet and sticky treat. Who doesn't love breakfast for dinner? Best enjoyed fresh. So this
that does sound good.
Amazing.
That sounds right up my alley. You guys know I have the biggest sweet tooth on this show.
Oh yeah, this is definitely sweet.
Yeah,
sure.
I love it. I love maple. I love syrup. I love pancakes. I love beer. I love gingerbread stout. So It's getting further and further away from like proper like what its origins though were of like just being a gingerbread stout. Like the more variations
I have a 4-pack of that too.
Yep. Yeah. The more variations they do on it, the less and less like of the gingerbread you're going to get in any individual variation. But that's okay. It's still awesome. It's cool that they do it. It's one of the. Hardywood is one of the biggest breweries in our state, arguably. So they do a lot of cool stuff. But
they do.
All right. So that's what I'm drinking my
drinking?
Dogfish Head Campfire Amplifier.
Ooh, such a good night for that.
It's a really good night for that, yeah. And it's been it's a good week for it too, to sort of celebrate some things.
Yes.
Given when we're recording this. So I really we've talked about it on the show before. It's basically attempting to be a s'mores beer. My take on it is I don't get much of the s'mores flavors, but it's still a really good stout. So you should check it out. Dogfish Head Campfire Amplifier, Flower Flare.
That's their s'mores beer.
Yeah, that's the one. That's what I said. Did I say that? I think I said s'mores. Moving on, I actually haven't updated our templates yet, obviously, because I still have news included in the deep dive template, and we no longer do news on this show. If you want to know what the goings-ons in the gaming industries are right now, you can check out our weekly live stream on twitch.tv. We do a show. So tonight, this Monday night, the night this episode comes out, there will be an up-to-date news show that is not 2 weeks behind. It is dealing with news from this previous week. And yeah, you can check that out. So that goes live at 8 o'clock every Monday night. So go check that out if you want to hear the news. And so in place of that, we don't really have anything in this spot. So we just kind of banter like we used to do, actually. So Is there anything you wanted to talk about that's not related to our show or news or...
yes.
Yeah.
Being unabashedly Penguin and Termite, we are excited about the results of the election in America in 2020. And so, again, if you have a bias across either way, we are an inclusive community. We sometimes talk about politics. We don't focus on it.
Yeah, we try to keep it low key unless it's something that needs to be talked about, like when we talked about Black Lives Matter.
Right.
And much of that was rooted in the fact that there was actually some pretty crazy and interesting implications rippling across the gaming industry as a result of that. But we also, again, made sure that we were clear to have taken a stand on that, too. We will probably be less aggressive about our take on the election, but it still is pretty influential and pretty important as to what's going on in the state of our nation right now. So I'm down to talk about it a little bit. What are your thoughts? What did you have in mind?
I am just baffled that despite no evidence, people are trying to take away the election win or discredit the results, which apparently happens every 4 years. Like there's always this like this contingent of people that are like, no, it's false, it's fraud, it's someone rigged it or cheated it, but never has it had a platform, which happens to be our current president, who will not concede. So hopefully, this is 2 weeks out. Hopefully there's a little bit more ground in that regard.
Yeah, I mean, it is complicated, as some people have pointed out more effectively than I have. There is technically the media can't say who's the president necessarily. I mean, there's the whole electoral process that still actually has to happen in December. So that's when the actual that is when, and so in some cases that is a formality. But I mean, this year is, if there was any time for faithless electors to come into play and cause a big stir, it would be this year, this election cycle. So it'll be interesting to see what happens in this period of time that's called the interregnum. There's your civics lesson for the day. The period of time from when a president is elected in early November, and when the president is installed in January, is called the interregnum. And this is going to be probably one of the more interesting ones. I think the last one that we've seen that was this interesting, quote unquote interesting, would have been the 2000 election with the challenge in Florida between Bush and Gore, the recounts and all that stuff. That was certainly. But even in that election, we went to the Supreme Court, and after their decision, Gore actually conceded. He said, all right, fine. And he had it's a really cool speech, actually. If you've never read, no matter what your thoughts are on the Democratic Party or Al Gore, you should read his speech because it's very interesting. He's all like, for the good of this nation, in the sake of unity, and for the sake of like our health as a nation, I will actually concede this election. So it's pretty cool. I can't imagine our current president ever making a speech like that.
Right. Yeah, me neither.
Is how politics have changed in the last 20 years.
And did you mention it was a Supreme Court decision to stop the recounts in Florida? That's as far as it got. It wasn't
about stopping the recounts in Florida. So the Supreme Court, for also another civics lesson. I was just speaking about this with my lawyer friend over the weekend.
A civics lesson from a slaver.
Yeah. 2 Hamilton references in one night. That's what you get. That's what you get in 80-Bit Pod Smash. The Supreme Court can't actually declare who the president is.
Right.
But they can make rulings on specific outcomes of vote counts or whatever. And so I don't remember the specifics. I'd have to look it up. But they did make a ruling on the count in Florida in some way, shape, or form. And so indirectly, you know what I mean? Like they indirectly certified who the president was. I think maybe that's what it was. Maybe they said you can't do another recount. You have to accept the results of the last recount or whatever.
Right. Yep. That's exactly what happened.
And so, so that indirectly meant that Gore said that, okay, fine, I'll secede. So apparently he still had legal recourse he could have taken. Like he didn't have to concede at that point. He could have continued to fight it even after the Supreme Court ruled on it. So he chose not to in this case. But that just goes to show the Supreme Court does not have, if you're hearing that and you are of the inclination to be worried that the Supreme Court might be able to declare who the president is, they actually can't do that. It would there would still be recourse that could be taken by either side should the Supreme Court try to make such a ruling. Interesting stuff, though. Nevertheless, no matter what your individual feelings are on it, it is certainly an unprecedented set of behaviors that we're seeing from the White House.
And sorry to you folks who might be trying to celebrate Thanksgiving with us, and we had to talk about that. But it's fresh on our heads. It's on our minds. It's in our communities.
That's true. They're like, oh gosh, we're already going to have these conversations all weekend.
So let's talk about that.
To drink our way through the conversations all weekend.
How are we going to interact with our family members this Thanksgiving? How's that for a DLC?
I have already told my family that. So I'm only coming up for the day because of COVID concerns. I said that, we can't predict what the state of the coronavirus is going to be like by the end of Thanksgiving. This was like 2 weeks ago. So I just gave them, I set the expectation. I said, we are just going to go ahead and just say we're not going to stay the night or the weekend.
Is that what you normally do?
Normally we go for the whole weekend. Normally I'd go.
Okay.
We'd go down like Wednesday. We'd spend the night. We'd stay till like Sunday. This time I'm like, no, we're going to drive down in the morning and we'll drive back that night. And it'll be a long day and it'll be an exhausting day. And with a toddler, it will possibly be a very challenging day.
Yep.
But we're going to make it work because we just don't want to put ourselves in the compromising position, considering despite all the election news has dominated the news cycle, as rightly it should. But like the coronavirus we've had some of the worst days we've had. Yeah, it's just raging across the nation right now. So it's one of those things where it's like, yeah, we're just going to make the smart decision for our family and do the one day thing. But in addition to that, I set the expectation. I said, and we can all agree, absolutely no one is allowed to talk politics.
Yeah,
Thanksgiving, because we've got some of our African-American family members, like half African-American family members that are going to be there. And I'm just like, I just don't want them to like hear some of the more inflammatory beliefs on my side of the family. I'm like, please no. Can we just all enjoy? We don't want to scare them away even more than they may already be. So
yeah, I will probably have my family over to my house. We usually have a big dinner. We host, and then sometimes we end the day decorating for Christmas. So we'll pull the tree up with everyone here, kids running around and like decorate the tree together. We've done that before, and that's been a lot of fun. So hopefully we'll do that again. I know my wife's cooking is amazing. My mom's cooking is awesome. She brings some great sides and extra appetizers and things, but my wife usually handles the turkey. And sometimes she does desserts. Who knows what's going to happen, but we have a special cocktail plan. It's like this pumpkin-based margarita that we're going to do that actually has real pumpkin in it. So I can't wait to make that as a like bartending cocktail person. I love doing that stuff. So we're going to do that. And, if politics comes up, I'm not going to say no. Like, let's go. 2020 has taught me something to just stand up for what's right, with Black Lives Matter movements, and in the rhetoric that comes out of the White House is just so harmful to folks and so exclusionary. And I got to stand up for what's right. So if false claims are going to come out, I'm going to combat them, and I'm going to challenge. If people are going to be talked down to because of their race talked about, then I will stand up for them. And I'm going to do the best I can to keep it as civil as possible, but I'm also not going to let it just walk, like, ha 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 ha, it's a funny joke. Like, no, I'd be like, that's racist. Or, ha ha ha, election. Yeah. I'm like, no, there's a process and this is legally happening and you have to figure this out. Like, we got to work through this together. And kind of like, I was inspired by Biden's victory speech. Just like reach across to those who don't believe the same way that you do and like try to heal and try to have unity and try to have a conversation and move through that. So we'll see, but it's also just a day. It's just one meal. It's one afternoon. So I doubt anything bad will happen. We're really good about staying civil. And we spent a whole week together at the beach over September and it was fine. Despite massive disagreements about masks and COVID-19 caution and all those things, we were fine. So I'm not super concerned about Thanksgiving. I'm really, really excited about it. I love Thanksgiving. I've come to appreciate it more as an adult than I have as a kid. And I love the get-togethers and the food and some of the beer and wine and just like relaxing. There's an atmosphere about Thanksgiving that is very unique to that holiday. And we never really watch football. So despite our topic tonight about sports video games.
We don't either as my family.
We don't really put on the game, but we could. Mm-hmm. It's just like, I don't know. It's weird. Like, the smells from the kitchen are just kind of enveloping the house, and there's this low key, like no responsibilities. Everyone's just chill. I try to get everything together in preparation in advance. So the day of is very relaxed. We usually have the parade on TV, which I guess will look different this year. So we'll see what COVID does to change the, all that stuff. But I'm excited. I love Thanksgiving.
Yep, Thanksgiving's great. All right, moving on. Thanksgiving, we can both agree, is probably one of our favorite things, but...
Doing this podcast is our favorite thing.
Doing this podcast is our favorite thing. Favorite things is the segment of our show where we share with you something we are excited about, something we are thrilled about from our past week or so, and in hopes that you will be inspired to go out and find your next favorite thing.
My favorite thing is going to be a continuation of what we just talked about with the election results. I found out that Biden was declared by the media, which is not confirmed, it's not certified, it's just based on the counts and the news that we have.
He's officially the projected elected president, I think is what they're calling him.
So this is like fresh news. I was on my way to Richmond from Fredericksburg to get this Hardywood beer that I'm drinking right now, and I just left the house when the news broke. And, I'm driving, so I'm trying to be very careful, keeping my eyes on the road and not getting worked up and crazy excited. So I just had New York Times on my phone, and like a GPS, I would just have it there. Obviously, I wasn't reading things. I wasn't clicking on links. I wasn't like details. There's so many questions. Like you just see the headline, Biden beats Trump, and it was huge. And I was so excited. My kids were in the backseat. So I had my 5-year-old and my 15-month-old. Another reason for extra caution while driving. But I took the opportunity. So here's what I had to do. I wanted to be very excited. I wanted to celebrate. I was very, very happy. It's like, finally, this is happening. The world is celebrating. And I realized my son doesn't know how to help truck drivers honk their horns. He doesn't know that yet. So I took the opportunity to let's combine this teaching moment where my son needs to learn that you can pump your fist, and truckers love to honk at kids. Like, it is a thing I grew up with. You just do it. It's fun and it's awesome, and it helps me celebrate, and I can stay focused on the road and drive and still like make it a thing. So my favorite thing was driving an hour down to Richmond, trying to get every truck to honk. And
nice.
My 5-year-old was so shy. He was so apprehensive at first. And then eventually he kind of clicked as truckers were honking, and it became like this awesome game. And on the way home, my 5-year-old was like, let's make that truck honk. Let's make that truck honk. And
awesome.
we had
how many did you get? Like, how many would you, if you had to guess?
Count. Probably 5 or so.
Okay,
a lot of truckers don't pay attention. They don't see. Like Sam would be like, he didn't see us because he could turn his head and look and like see their eyes. I couldn't because I'm driving. So like he had more knowledge about what was going on. But when one did, dude, he lit up, and it was so awesome.
Yeah.
And so we just had this great like day. I went down there, went to Hardywood. There was a food truck. I had a gingerbread stout on tap. He got this fancy craft lemonade, which he didn't appreciate, but I had a few sips of it, and it was really, really good lemonade. I don't know where they got it from. And I got this curry from this curry truck, and we were like, the vibe down there was just this relief, this like air of just cheeriness, and everyone was happy, and it was so good. The weather was perfect. Sam ran around outside, and we came home honking at truckers the way home. It was just awesome. So that's my favorite thing. That was my Saturday.
Nice. You failed to mention that the reason you had the day with your sons is because our wives ended up escaping for the weekend together, and with some other friends.
I just didn't find that detail necessary.
Well, fortunately, it's necessary. it's important for mine.
Oh, okay.
Partially, I was excited to be able to enable my wife to do it. My son's a year and like 8 months old, and my wife in that time has not really had an opportunity to go somewhere for herself for an entire weekend. So that was, on the one hand, I was like, part of my favorite thing is enabling her to do that, just because I know how valuable that has been for me in some rare cases. And so not having been able to have that for a long time, it's nice to have been able to enable her to do that. While she was gone, I invited my friend Nate, shout out Nate, to come hang out and help me parent for the weekend, or for Saturday. So he came and he treated me to dinner. He came and he cooked me some surf and turf. So yeah, shrimp and steak, and sauteed onions and mushrooms, and we made mashed potatoes, and it was so good. And then the day after, we took the leftover shrimp and we made shrimp tacos. it was just awesome. It was a lot of food. And so, yeah, I'll say that the time with him was my favorite thing, but specifically the food was just, it blew my mind. So I need to learn some more tricks on. I'm getting better with my cooking in general, but I want to learn some more of the tricks on, especially steaks and stuff like that. But yeah, so that was my favorite thing. He also brought what he described as the most expensive whiskey that he's ever purchased, bottle of whiskey that he's ever purchased.
What was it?
And I'm trying to remember. I can't remember off the top of my head. But it was so good too.
Dan,
so whatever. I'm sorry.
You're the worst.
I'm the worst, bro. That's number 3. All right. Well, that's favorite things. So that leads us to our next segment, which is DLC. Downloadable content is a conversation you wouldn't normally have about video games, and it's a segment of our show that is meant to be sort of a fun discussion before we get into our main topic. Not that our main topic isn't fun, but it's supposed to be a little bit more lighthearted or more of a sort of brain teaser. And so I wanted to talk today. I wanted to really keep this tied to Thanksgiving because the rest of the episode will be very loosely tied as we start to talk about sports games. So for DLC today, I wanted to ask why, and this is not so much a video game question, but it's more of just sort of a thought-provoking question. Why do you think Thanksgiving is such a sports holiday? I know that there is traditionally a game, and that's part of what fuels it, and so for football fans, but why do you think that's become kind of a fixture of Thanksgiving?
I would have to guess.
That's what this is. It's all guesswork.
It is guesswork. I've always heard of it is it's predictable that the Cowboys and what was the Redskins, the Washington Redskins, they've renamed their team to the Washington Sports Team, I think, or something. I don't know. It's some generic,
team, I think is what it is, yeah.
Which is awesome. I love that they renamed the team. I'm on that side, just to throw that out there. But
it's a dumb name. It's still a really dumb, even if it's a temporary name, it's a really dumb one.
Yeah, I agree. And that's why it's kind of funny. But I'm glad they renamed it for reasons. And anyway, there's the rivalry between the Redskins and the Cowboys. Like, that was the thing. And so that was the big deal. Like, it had to be on because they played every Thanksgiving. And so everywhere I went as a kid, whether it was their various families' houses, they all love football. And I wasn't raised in a football home, but my parents were Cowboys fans. And my uncle was a Redskins fan. And especially when they got together, they had to watch the game. And they would gloat and laugh at each other and, poke fun and do all the things. So I wonder if that rivalry fueled some of the football watching. That might be
it. That's a really good guess. I would think that I would argue that might be the spark. And then what fueled it is just the fact that it's like, hey, there's a game that's going to be on. And we already have had probably, usually people eat in the middle of the day. That's kind of also a weird, typical American tradition as opposed to an actual evening meal. So we just ate. We don't want to go do something. We don't want to go out. So let's just sit at home. Just sit on the couch and watch the game. You know what I mean? I feel like that sort of the sort of indolence of the activity, or should I say lack of activity of that day. And it's not as it's not as long ancient of a holiday as Christmas or Halloween, or Easter, these century old holidays that have so many traditions associated with them. Thanksgiving is relatively new in the grand scheme of history, so there are much fewer traditions attached to it, I would argue. There's all the history about the Pilgrims and all that stuff, but that's just sort of the actual day itself is very young in American history, so. But even beyond just the watching the game itself, there's the fact people are always throwing turkey bowls and stuff, and they're going out and they're going they organize games that you play in the morning before people start cooking the dinner or whatever, or you play while your family's cooking dinner. That seems to be also a part of it, is going out in the morning, you play the game, either play the game, and then in the evening you eat, or the afternoon you eat dinner and then watch the game. It seems to be just a part of that seems to be the tradition of Thanksgiving in many ways. So it's. And again, it's not necessarily one that my family does and that I do, but I know that it is a very widely loved part of Thanksgiving across our country.
To shed a little objectivity, of course, the internet pulls through, and there's a Wikipedia article on NFL on Thanksgiving Day, and I'll read the little blurb of where this came from. The concept of American football games being played on Thanksgiving Day dates back to 1876, shortly after the game had been invented, as it was a day that most people had off from work. So just being off from work, that's it. In that year, the college football teams at Yale and Princeton began an annual tradition of playing each other on Thanksgiving Day. The University of Michigan also made it a tradition to play annual Thanksgiving games, holding 19 such games from 85 to 1905. The Thanksgiving Day games between Michigan and the Chicago Maroons in the 1890s have been cited as the beginning of Thanksgiving Day football. In some areas, most commonly in New England, high school teams play on Thanksgiving, usually to wrap up the regular season. So there you go. Rivalries regularly playing each other on the same day. Everyone has off work.
Could have just asked Google, man.
But it's more fun to
it is more fun to
our experience, why we think football is a thing. Yeah. But
maybe I will watch the game this year. Oh, I guess I probably won't have time. I won't have time. Now that I think about it, it's like we'll be driving down there like first thing in the morning, doing Thanksgiving. Gavin's going to nap there at my parents' house. And then it's like, we're going to...
Yeah, little kids throw a wrench, man.
Yeah.
I got into a habit of like, we're going to do a turkey trot. And I would do it with my wife. I do it with my brother. And like, we have a great time. But then once you start hosting and you have to cook and you have kids and you have naps and all the things that go around all that stuff, you can't really leave the house because it leaves one parent strapped with kids who can't cook. And it becomes a big deal. And you got to juggle the schedule, man.
Yep, for real.
Yep.
All right. Well, I mean, we'll be lucky to even see the parade this year, even for no matter whatever happens with it. That's gonna be interesting. I wonder what they're doing. I bet we can Google it.
All right. The internet.
Maybe that's what we'll do. Parade games next year. So many of
them. Oh, that would be perfect. Yes.
Wait, are there parade games out there?
No, not games about parades, but we could do a parade of games. Like,
or we could talk about like video games that show up in parades, like Spider-Man.
Yes, there you go. That's it. Done.
Goku.
Macy's, because Pikachu and Goku have crept up as our generation has grown up. And yes, let's do it next year. Right here, 80bitpodsmash.com. That's our landing website.
Committing.
You can find links to all of our platforms. Next year, 2021 Thanksgiving, I believe you will be right here, and you will hear about parades and video games.
Thanksgiving.
2021. I thought I said 21.
You said 2020.
Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, 2020. I hope 2020 Thanksgiving actually probably feels like a year off at this point, given how this year has gone. So, all right.
That's it for DLC.
That is it for the DLC, which leads us to our main topic, which is da-da-da. That's a very trademarked thing, and so I should probably stop.
EA Sports. It's in the game.
Sports games. Yeah, so sports games are pretty good, I guess, but not my cup of tea. That's it. That's the show. Good night, everybody. See you next week.
There's so many different types of sports games that I actually have a major amount of experience with them and didn't even realize it until I started looking at what defines a sports game. So that's where we're going to start. What is a sports game?
Yeah, so the one single unifying thing of all the different types of sports games is the sports aspect of it. In some way, shape, or form, it simulates some aspect of some sport, which is defined as something outside of video games, right? Like sports games are games about sports that are a thing in real life. So soccer, basketball, boxing, fencing, there's whatever,
racing.
Racing even. Yeah. So racing games are like a subset of sports games. We did have a whole deep dive already on racing games. So we'll probably avoid talking about those as much as we can since we already did it. But technically racing are a type of sports game. So, I mean, there's all kinds of quibbling over what is a sport, which is a whole different topic. But we're going to sort of, I mean, for our purposes, we will treat the commonly accepted sports as sports games for all intents and purposes. So that extends from everything to the Olympics, to NASCAR, obviously all the bald sports, wrestling, WWE, those, as far as we're concerned, count as sports games, boxing. Those types of games kind of are where sports and fighting meet. So
tennis?
Tennis. I said all the ball games. The line between a fighting game and a sports game in many ways comes down to how sporty the fighting is treated. You know, if that makes sense. So Mortal Kombat's not a sports game, definitively, but Arms, it has a lot of boxing. It's more about the game and scoring points and stuff like that. So I don't
Punch
know.
Out?
Punch Out. Wii boxing for sure. So I mean, there's some lines, there's some delineations that certainly can be drawn, and you have a list of types, I think, that you wanted to kind of highlight before we really got
through.
Into
These are the various types of sports games. We have arcades. Arcade sports games have traditionally been very popular at the arcades. Competitive nature of sports themselves lend itself well to arcades, where the main objective is usually to obtain a high score. The arcade style is generally more unrealistic and focuses on quicker gameplay experience, more actiony. However, the competitive nature of sports and being able to gain a high score while competing against friends for free online, if you're playing a console game, has made online sports games very popular. And entries in this category that I'm going to highlight as personal favorites from my life: NBA Jam on the Super Nintendo, I played the mess out of. I played so much. That's the only basketball game I've ever played, like, to this day, was NBA Jam and its sequel, Hang Time, on the N64. So much fun. They had turbo mode where it was like 2-on-2 basketball, and you could like pass the ball like crazy. The ball's on fire. You can shatter the net. I mean, like, dunk across the whole court. Just ridiculous. But it had real life players, Michael Jordan, the Chicago Bulls, like all the people, Charles Barkley, and who's the guy that had the crazy colored afro? I don't remember his name anymore, but he was in there too. And then there was NFL Blitz, made by the same company, Midway. NFL Blitz was ridiculous. It was 3D polygonal kind of N64 era football game. And it had the same thing, like turbo mode, on fire balls. Like, you could do these ridiculous tackles and WWF style wrestling moves on each other, the players, as you catch them. And it was just ludicrous. Like, crazy football games. Had a blast. I loved those kind of sports games. So those are really what like epitomizes the arcade sports game. Then you have like simulation games. Simulation games are more realistic. The emphasis being more on realism than how fun the game is to pick up and play. Simulation games tend to be slower and more accurate, while the arcade games are fast. NBA Jam had 2 players on each team, for example. That's like arcadey, when really there's supposed to be 5? Is it 5-on-5 for basketball? Or is it 11?
I don't know.
See, that shows how little we know about sports. And so people who love sports roll in their eyes already. But simulation games today are like the 2K games, Madden. There's racing simulators. There's Fight Night was some of the boxing simulators. So those are like the uber realistic like sports games that come out.
Right. They're meant to like make you feel like you're a part of the actual, again, the whole like NBA 2K and Madden, like they're meant to like you are the coach of the team and making it happen or whatever is the kind of the implication.
Madden actually has like actual stats that get downloaded off the internet based on real life. So as players perform on the field, their stats get put into the game mechanics and then they change inside Madden. So they're always up to date, and people will run simulations across whole seasons of NFL and predict the winners of Super Bowls and crazy games. So simulation, like, it's a big deal.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
A newer subset of sports games is the management. Sports management games, speaking of being a coach, puts the player in the role of a team manager, where some games are played online against other players. Management games usually pit the player against AI-controlled teams in the same league. Players are expected to handle strategy, tactics, transfers, and financial issues. So there's a whole bunch of, like, sports team management games on like Steam. You can be football manager, soccer manager, etc. They're all there. But that's a whole like macro level kind of SimCity level-esque sports genre. Then there's the multi-sport games. So like, this is track and field, Wii Sports Resort, caveman games, if you remember that on the NES. Oh, it's so funny.
I do.
You can throw your wife in a game of you hold her by the ankles and you spin really fast and you throw her. It's ridiculous.
That is awfully sexist.
It is so bad. Like, it would not fly today, but it's so ludicrous. Like, you beat each other on the head with clubs and like a fighting thing, and but there's a whole multi-sport aspect.
Grab your wife by the ankles and beat each other over the head with your wives.
Oh, wow. You went there. This is a family-friendly podcast. And then there's sports-based fighting games, as you were talking about, with maybe ARMS fits into this category, but that's debatable.
That's very debatable, but yeah.
You have like Fight Night, UFC. There's the whole wrestling game genre, which had both entries in arcade and simulation. Now we're more in the simulation phase with like WWE 2K.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So, but that's kind of like a fighting game too. So there's a hybrid mix going on there. But so those are the types of fighting games listed over on Wikipedia when it comes to sports games. And I don't think there's anything that they missed. If there is, you can correct me.
Yeah, I mean, there's a nice broad, category, and it's nice. Like every genre we've ever done deep dives on, there's all kinds of blurred lines. And I think of like, Rocket League, one could make the argument is a sports game because it's emulating soccer, but it's just so ridiculous and over the top in how it does that it's kind of its own thing too. So, but Cool. Well, let's dig into the history a little bit of sports games. The first, one could argue actually that in many ways sports games were the origin of video games. If you think about it, that kind of makes sense because before Mario, before Sonic, before Pac-Man even, nobody had an idea of as what games should be, video games should be. So they drew inspiration from real life. And what are games in real life that we can turn into an electronic form? Well, there's all these sports games in real life. So that kind of, I think, served as much of the origin for the first sports games. You could trace it back as early as 1958. A guy named William Higginbotham created a game.
That's an awesome name.
It's an awesome name. Created a game called Tennis for Two using an oscilloscope. So it's not a video game. It wasn't a computer so much as a thing, but it was essentially a racket that you change the angle of and then press a button to return the ball. So it kind of demonstrated that an action game as opposed to a puzzle game could be created and played on a computer. The first one that is regularly cited is Atari's Pong in 1972. And again, as simple as it is, Pong is basically tennis and kind of served as one of the earliest video games, period, much less earliest sports games. We can kind of trace the video games' origins back to sports games. As much as I give sports games a hard time, they actually were kind of the first in that space.
Yeah, and it makes sense with high scores and competitive nature, and like you have a set of rules that are already in place. You have a grid with which to approach how to play the game. It implies skill and multiplayer aspects of sports. I mean, this is all there. It just makes sense that it would translate from real life to something computerized for the first time. It gives developers a framework to approach it from a design perspective. All that stuff's kind of done. And this was all before we got into anything to do with stories or exploration or platforming and any of those things. So yeah, this makes perfect sense. The beginnings of sports games are the beginnings of video games. It's just kind of the same. Yeah.
Yep. So throughout the 70s, there were all kinds of innovations that were happening. They were experimenting with team sports games and cooperative play. And so there's a bunch of titles in that space, but it's all very rudimentary stuff still at this point. 1980s is really kind of where it started to take off a little bit more. And both Atari and Television, they started branching out to more games than just tennis, basically. And again, early sports games throughout the 70s were tennis, a little bit of basketball. Taito released a game called Basketball in 1974. And looks like there were driving games and stuff like that. But really, they started trying to then, okay, well, we have all these other sports. They try to do more basketball and stuff like that than just tennis, baseball, and all that stuff. So, you'd see Activision released a game called Activision Tennis in 1981. 1982, there was a game called Track and Field. And also that same year would be Pole Position. But all those
Pole
games,
Position.
relatively,
oh
I
my
recognize.
gosh.
Yeah.
Pole Position was so fun. It's an F1 racing game. It is iconic. I mean, it was in all the arcades. It was an NES version. I played a lot of Pole Position. I love that game.
Yeah. So, I mean, go ahead.
It's just and then baseball is everywhere. I mean, you can see that on television, Atari, just generic baseball, kung fu, soccer. Like you said, very rudimentary, just some pixelized sprites on a screen moving around. But it translated well. It still gave you that thrill that you could play a sports game against someone else in the comfort of your home or in the public space of an arcade and have your friends gather around and compete with each other and kind of get that hype that you would get at a sports game on a much smaller scale, but you could still have that experience.
Yeah, I mean, in the 1980s, it blew up. I mean, there's just so many titles here. Sports games really dominated in this era in a lot of ways. Maybe not on a sheer popularity scale, but from just the numbers. There's just so many on this list and so many different, again, innovations in this space as to different kinds of sports and stuff like that. I mean, you had kayaking games coming out at this time,
javelin,
bullfighting,
hurdles, hammer throw,
ice skating, fighting, crazy,
fishing.
Yep.
Yeah.
All of which I would argue count as sports games. So there's nothing wrong with that. So
and of course, the 80s happened, the crash, the video game crash, where the entire video game industry was just overwhelmed with tons and tons of software that were just mostly garbage because everyone was trying to chase Atari, which led to the collapse of the video game industry in the 80s. If you haven't watched High Score on Netflix. It's documentary about the history of video games. Go check that out. That's a lot of context for how we approach a lot of our shows and how you can understand like how this stuff works. So we talked about the plethora of sports games coming out across all genres of sports. There's so many games. There's water skiing. Like everything you can think of under the sun, sports wise, was here. And then it crashed. And then we move into the 90s, but like the late 80s and 90s had this resurgence of quality games and how Nintendo kind of resurrected what software was, what video games looked like. And we had in 1989 our very first ever third-party publisher, Electronic Arts, EA, which I believe we have talked about in previous episodes, came out. Producer Hilleman hired GameStars.
Have we talked about EA? Have we not talked about EA yet?
At some point in our life, in our podcast, we've talked about EA. I promise.
We have certainly talked. I think we have had bonus episodes on EA before.
I think we have. Major video game publisher, and like I said, the first third-party one to come out. Activision was close on its heels, I believe. I might be wrong on the timing of those two, but I know they're both like the very first ones. But they hired GameStar's Scott Orr, I don't know who that is, to redesign John Madden Football for the fast-growing Sega Genesis. In 1990, Orr and Hilleman released the game that is still recognized today as Madden Football for the best-selling sports game in North America up until that time.
I mean, arguably this release is what made EA and Activision as we know it, because Activision would then soon follow suit with their sports games. And I mean, these games talk about printing money. I mean, these games print money. Madden is an obscenely popular game. And yeah, this is the origin of it, 1990.
And Madden, right? Putting someone as popular as that sportscaster on the cover of their game and licensing everything that they needed to do to make this happen and appeal to the mass fan of NFL, like really, really set that bar. And we still see it today. Like it's still in those roots. I want to find the sales charts. Madden, I have to Google it, but the Madden sales every single year always top the top 10 games every single year consistently. And there's not much difference between all of them, but they're there.
Yeah, I would be interested in knowing, again, I'm going to probably look up gameplay sometime this week because I really want to know what the original Madden game was like in 1990.
Oh yeah.
It's definitely a far cry from what it is now. I mean, now, like you said, it's a simulation game as to simulate that sport. It was still that in 1990, but just with the capabilities of the NES. Was it Sega Genesis? I'm sorry.
Sega Genesis, 1990.
Yep. Cool. Moving on while you're looking that up, 1991 would release Tecmo Super Bowl, which is a fantastic game. And that one was for Nintendo console,
Nintendo.
Right? Yep.
Mm-hmm. I have Tecmo Bowl came out before Tecmo Super Bowl. Super Bowl was the sequel.
Tecmo Bowl.
But Tecmo Bowl is incredible. It is amazing. And it was on the NES Classic, and I brought it into work, and a crowd immediately emerged of people that I had no idea had an interest in gaming whatsoever. And they were all like, yeah, I remember Tecmo Bowl. I played this. I'm like, what? Who are you? You never talk about games? You kind of think of them as a toy or a kid's thing, but you're at my desk at work during a break and you want to play Tecmo Bowl with me? Let's go. Let's see what happens. I don't know what I'm doing. And I still had some of the most fun I've had with a football game ever. Especially that. I mean, outside of NFL Blitz, which is the best. I love Tecmo Bowl. Tecmo Bowl is just near and dear to my heart.
So there were some other good ones in the 1990s, but we'll in the effort of time, we'll move on to talk about more of the things we want to talk about. In the late 90s, mid to late 90s, we'd start to see the emergence of some of the, quote, extreme sports games. Extreme sports at the time being defined as snowboarding, BMX, skateboarding, and so we'd see snowboarding game in 1996, Namco's Alpine Surfer. In 1997, we'd see skateboarding games, Top Skater, and of course, 1999's Tony Hawk Pro Skater, which is mwah. I love Tony Hawk Pro Skater. At least I loved as a kid.
You talk about Activision sports games.
Yeah,
there it is, right
into
there.
It. That's it. Yep. That's it. Yeah. So SSX2 in 2000 was a snowboarding game that I absolutely loved. At least Tricky, which is I think the GameCube Sequel?
It was a sequel. Yeah.
Yeah, that
SSX,
came
the
out.
first one was a PS2 exclusive. The sequel was third party everywhere. It was all EA. EA did it. EA Big, I believe, was the brand.
Loved SSX Tricky.
Me too.
And I loved Tony Hawk as well. Even though I wasn't a big skater kid, I was around a lot of skater kids. So me being the gamer and trying to bridge that gap, I was like, oh, let's play Tony Hawk. And I liked it a lot. So, yep, sports games, in the 2000s would then continue to explode. Again, just becoming a huge business in the mid 2000s. And that's kind of where they started solidifying those kind of yearly releases of those Maddens and NBA 2Ks and all that stuff. And there's some information here about how they had to strike deals and licenses with ESPN and how those licenses kind of changed hands a couple times. But now we're at the point where Activision releases NBA 2K every year and EA releases Madden every year. And those are kind of, is it Take-Two? Take-Two does NBA 2K. I'm sorry, not Activision. Right. What does Activision do every year?
Activision does not have an annualized sports game that I'm aware of.
I'm sorry, I'm thinking of Take-Two then. Yeah, Take-Two, which is
Take-Two Interactive launched on Dreamcast and begun the whole 2K in
2K,
the early 2000s, the whole 2K series, which they have had gone through some translations and buyouts, and their Sega collapsed, and now what we have is now NBA 2K.
Yep, and Take-Two is the umbrella publisher that publishes both BioShock and Borderlands, if they sound familiar.
Right. Exactly.
So we don't talk about them quite as much as Activision and EA, but they are there as well. So
there's also PGA Tour 2K. That's a golf game, same developer. And then NBA 2K is what they're really, really known for.
Other notable things that happened over the history of sports games were the emergence of motion detection. So these actually even go back as early as 1993 with Sega's Sega Activator, a motion detection game controller, and they released Eternal Champions, Greatest Heavyweights of the Ring.
Yep, that's exactly it. I don't know what those games are.
Yeah, I don't know what they are either.
I've never even seen this thing before.
Old school motion detection games. The real innovation in this space was the Wii in 2006. They released Wii Sports, which had just a ton of different motion controlled sports games. So bowling, golf, tennis, baseball, boxing, and the motion control aspect of it kind of was a novelty at the time. And something that became incredibly popular with sports games. They're not necessarily the mainstream go-to for those big money printers, but they are still something that's in high demand with sports games. Is the being able to actually emulate the sport in your physical motions in a video game as well is very, very popular. So, okay. Is there anything else you wanted to talk about? Obviously, we reached kind of modern day, and we talked about the sort of serialized sports games, but the space is still...
don't forget FIFA. FIFA is a money printer for EA.
FIFA, yeah, for sure.
A crazy money printer every single year on the top 10 sales charts, year after year, with Madden, with NBA 2K. I mean, these three sports games top the charts every single year. They print so much money. Gearbox makes, Gearbox is affiliated with 2K, and so is Rockstar. So there's overlap, and I don't know the relationships with the publishers and the dev studios off the top of my head without looking things up. But all that stuff is just crazy big business, crazy money. And that's all around. That's not just making the games, but the licensing deals. There's a whole subculture of what they call the Madden curse that's on whatever football player is sponsored on the cover of the Madden game of that year, usually ends up hurt or injured. And something bad happens to them, and they just
the whole culture.
This whole...
So it's so much of a culture that it's got superstitions. That's how you know it's a right and proper culture,
right? Yeah.
Yep. So there's arguably more of a culture around sports games than there are around actual video games themselves.
Yep.
So that's crazy. Yeah, it's nuts. But let's spend the rest of our time talking about. We have a whole bunch of other questions to do. So we spent 15 minutes on history. Let's move on to. Talk about them, but these other questions should go a lot faster. Let's start with: do you have a favorite sports game? What's your favorite if you do? Okay,
probably Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 3. If I had to label a single title, but like I mentioned earlier, We talked about NBA Jam, how much fun that was on the Super Nintendo back in the day. Tecmo Bowl on the Nintendo, which I didn't really appreciate until the NES Classic had come out more in my adult life. I love that. And I love the snowboarding games. I played so many 1080 snowboarding for N64, Snowboard Kids, also on the N64, and then SSX on the PS2, and then Tricky, of course, also on PS2, which you could have played it anywhere. Sure. So those are like the sports games that I enjoyed a lot, and I played with folks, with friends, and I enjoyed the NFL Blitz was kind of a flash in the pan at one point in my life that I loved. We kind of rented it or something, and like I played that a lot for that time period. But and then we can't even forget. We cannot fail to mention the wrestling games.
Yeah,
WWF at the time, it's now WWE, had a string of N64 games that were just amazing and ridiculously fun and resulted in hours and hours and hours spent at friends' houses doing 4-player matches.
I didn't even care for WWF, but the games were just so
they were
much
so
fun.
good.
And I think I told you earlier before we started the show, we had a whole episode on character customization. I made the most ridiculous looking character that I've ever made, but unironically, like 100% like pre-middle school Penguin Man here, just being like this. He's got Goku hair. He's got tattoos. He's wearing a trench coat. He like hovers 3 feet off the ground. I don't even know if that was an option. That's how I remember him in my mind. And I'm just like, this is the coolest looking thing I've ever done. And it was a wrestling game. And it just was ridiculous, fighting like Tombstone or whatever and Kane. And I'm just like, yeah, my guy. I don't even remember which game it was, but I love those like WrestleMania games. Were a blast to get into it. I have no investment in the like WWF culture, WWE culture at all. And yet I love those games. I grew up
they're like
them.
No WWF No Mercy for the N64, I think goes down in history as the single best wrestling video game of all time, because it had like, you could go backstage, you could create any kind of like character intros and music, and so the character creation just went nuts. All these weapons, like all this insanity that happened. And it was all kind of based on real life. Like it was definitely an arcade wrestling game, but it had a little bit more roots to reality than like NBA Jam did. And so it was still like, it bridged that gap enough to be relatable. And like, I could see this on TV and then go do it in the game. And of course, these are professional athletes that do stunt work and stuff. And like, they're all trained to do those things on TV. But the fact that you could do it in the video game and nothing was off limits. And it was like, oh, so much fun. I just remember hours and hours, like I said earlier, with like, all 4 friends. I think James, friend of the show, Tommy, T-Bone, also live in chat regularly with us. Like we spent so many nights playing No Mercy. So I have to say that for my favorite sports games. What are yours?
My favorite of all time has got to be SSX Tricky. That was like most sports games I played in my childhood and young youth would have been with other people. SSX Tricky was the one that I was like, I was played for hours on my own, like on my GameCube. Just absolutely love that game. So
it's time to rock around it, rock around it.
Right outside. It's tricky, tricky. Yeah, I just adore that game. Played a little bit of Tony Hawk too on my own, but SSX was the one that I really just got into. Yeah, I mean, I like it, like you said, I love the WrestleMania games. I loved Tecmo Bowl. I played that on my NES and a lot with people again, but just like it. Again, it still like sticks out in my head as like, yeah, old school football game.
Yep.
But I mean, more modern sports games, I'm not entirely averse to. I don't like the Madden, 2K, FIFA fare, but I do like some of the more experimental ones. I think Rocket League is cool. I like a lot of the sporty games. They've included like sport influence that has influenced other games. Like Overwatch had every summer would have like a little sports mini game they included in the game called what was it called? It was the name of one of the characters, but basically it was like one of the characters that has the ability to like knock things back, like with one of his attacks. They made like a soccer game in that, and I am just blanking on the character's name, but so that was fun.
I have no idea.
Yeah, okay. Blitzball, for example, in Final Fantasy
X
was
I played
awesome.
so much Blitzball.
Yes, so cool. Yeah, just a fun like mini game included in the game, and it was entirely a sports game within an RPG, which was great. So I think those are some of my more favorite kind of sporty game things. Shoot, there's no one that came to mind, but I'm like, I mean, I like ARMS a lot, and it's debatable whether it's a sports game. It is definitely more on the fighting side of fighting sports games. but I would argue in some regards that it's got sports games influence in it as well. So cool. Well, let's talk about what innovations you think have been most revolutionary to the genre, or consequently, as we like to talk about with this question, what innovations has this genre brought to the gaming industry as well?
I think the idea of simulations, I mean, there's Microsoft Flight Simulator, but outside of that, we have crazy, intricate, detailed simulation software that exists in a gaming space, which you would think any sort of simulation software would be used to bring new innovation to the sport itself. For example, if you're going to run simulations on a football team or a baseball team with advanced statistics and AI algorithms that will do predictions for you, you would want to do that when you're doing your draft picks in real life to try and put together your team. But we have that in the gaming space, and like those things feed each other. So there's innovation across gaming and in actual sports. When I think about Gran Turismo or Forza Motorsports, NASCAR video games, and how they simulate, like, I have to say, I became a NASCAR fan because of Gran Turismo. And there was a NASCAR track, and NASCAR's introduced, I believe it was Gran Turismo 4, where you could choose a NASCAR and you could drive it. And I was like, okay, let's load up everything in the most simulation mode there is. That means no assists at all, no braking, no acceleration, no gear changing, no traction control, nothing. Like, let's just do raw simulation straight up. And I played a NASCAR race, and I hit the gas and I completely spun out and did donuts and could not control the car at all. And at that point I was like, if this is simulation, if this is real life, if this matches, which it does. I mean, at that time, that was the creme de la creme of simulation racing. Then that's what NASCAR drivers are doing. So they have the finesse to control throttle with clutch and braking and not to give it too much, and how to enter a turn, how to exit a turn, follow the line, how much brake to apply, how much, like, you need to have a full blown racing rig to appreciate what this simulation is. And when that clicked for me, I became a NASCAR fan. I was like, the engineering that goes into tweaking and tuning a car at a team level with the pit stops and the tires and the changing of gas, weight, tire pressure, like spoiler adjustments for all of these things that are simulated in this video game that I've discovered, I translate literally to real life. Well, all of the research that is done in real life goes back into the video games, making them more realistic. And that produces AI, and that produces algorithms and prediction and real life modeling. Thermodynamics would be something that's like next level as a result of this type of stuff. Being able to predict real life environment in a gaming space. And so you think about how that influences other video games when it comes to things like combat, and something as wacky as Borderlands could benefit from a real life physics model that may have been trained by a sports game, by research done for sports games, and how to predict the trajectory of a football based on how much thrust you give it and what the air pressure is of both the ball and the weather. And like all of these things, these intricate systems that are all at play here. So the innovations most revolutionary to gaming in general are all of these simulations, and how like sports continue to drive that forward. And every single generation of consoles and advancements in PC and computing technology, and like we're about to see this new PS5, Xbox Series X world, the next Madden's coming, MLB The Show is coming, NBA 2K is coming, FIFA, like all these next gen things are coming, and our internet's getting better. And so we're going to have these multi-connected cloud-based streaming services, kind of computing happening, algorithms operating outside the console, but out in it's going to be nuts. Like it's going to be crazy. But to me, that's like the crux of innovation when it comes to sports games and what they bring.
My answer was going to be research, just the sheer amount of research that and enthusiasm that goes into these games. I mean, I may not love them. I may not be interested in them, but I have to respect the sheer amount of, like, the people who work on these games, like, clearly have a passion for them. Even in the EA and Take-Two space, where they are kind of re-releasing the same game over again, like, they understand there's a passion for them from the players. And so, like, they still have to do the research and figuring out all those statistics about who's where, who's what players, have these. So, like, there's research. There's entire teams dedicated to researching this stuff. And that kind of stuff can only benefit games as a whole, but especially benefit the sports games in the innovations in that space. Also, it has helped immensely in bringing video gaming into the mainstream. Mm-hmm. There's an entire subculture of gamers that are sports gamers, and they are as welcome in our spaces as any other kind of gamer. And I cannot judge someone else's taste when I was an Anthem player for a little while, so like whatever, I deserve to be the bottom of the barrel as that as well. So like there's just there's an entire subculture, and like they are also as excited as you and I are for the PlayStation 5 and the Xbox Series X, because they're going to be able to play their sports games that are going to look beautiful and run beautifully on that system as well. So they're stoked about it, and it's interesting to kind of consider them as part of our family, even though there's an instinct to want to be like, sports games, they must be lesser gamers than us. But no, the reality is like, no, they're just as much excited about, they are just as enthused as video games as I am. They just like a different flavor of video game than I do. And that's awesome. That's great. That should be celebrated. But it has helped because, people who tend to like sports tend to be cooler people. So people who like sports games because they like sports tend to add a level of, I would argue, coolness that some of us nerds over here who are like, my black mage has 13 intellect and can cast a spell at a rate of 4 spells per second. Like, there's a level of nerdiness there that, though I love and I adore because I am a nerd, a lot of people deride, and wrongfully deride, I should say, but certainly, having the kind of cool kid who's into soccer or whatever play video games and legitimize that space, I think has gone a long way into sort of making it seem like a more acceptable entertainment medium for most people. So I think that's is that an innovation? Yeah, I would argue that's an innovation. It has certainly helped bring more money into the space that has allowed and enabled more developers to make their visions a reality. That makes sense. Mm-hmm. So yeah. Cool. We're going to skip pros and cons, I think, because we're wrapping up on time. So let's just talk about, what do you want to see from the genre going forward?
I'd love to see the advancements. You guys can probably get the passion from my voice about speaking of simulations. I would love to see more advanced simulations across the board. I would really love to see more advanced models when it comes to like an athlete's ability when it comes to muscles and the physics behind like the strength and support of what muscles provide. It can go down to that level of detail and down to like tires. And what kind of tires, what are they made out of, and what kind of road are you on? What's the temperature of the track? What's the details of the tread and like racing slicks, and how much rubber's on the road already that has been worn off of other drivers that is embedded in the asphalt that affects the grip and temperatures of the tires themselves. Like it just gets crazy, and how much detail there is. I would love to see that move forward. I also wish that there was more of a comeback of arcadey sports games. There's kind of been a dip in that whole genre. Like we have the Tony Hawk Pro Skater 1 and 2 remake really is the epitome of that story for 2020 of that genre. I'm sorry. And I wish they would bring things like NFL Blitz back, or like revive the WWE wrestling arcade style game instead of just sticking to WWE 2K, which is simulation. I want to see that come back. So what do I want to see from the genre going forward? I want more arcade games, more arcade sports games that are like NBA Jam, SSX, and Tony Hawk's Pro Skater. And I want to see more realistic simulation implemented. And I'm really looking forward to Gran Turismo 7. It's announced that it will come out 2021. So I can't wait for next year to see that.
Awesome. I have nothing to add to that because this is the episode. This is the answer that I'm going to phone it in on. Because I'm like, I don't particularly have any answer for what I want to see from this space going forward, because I'm not particularly, this is where my prejudice is showing, and I'm like, I'm just not interested in it. So therefore, whatever they do, I'm sure will be great and awesome as long as they continue to do right by their fans. That's all I want to see from them going forward. So
nice.
That's it then. That's our show. So please, Pod Smashers, tell us. We know there are some of you out there who are super into sports games, so please let us know your thoughts on this genre. You're probably more expert and expertise and passion for this particular genre. So please let us know what your thoughts are on that. Do you love them? Are you enthused by them? What sports games you love? What sports games you feel like do justice to the sports you love? And what do you want to see more of in that space? And Termite will tell you where you can give us that feedback.
You can give us feedback at 80bitpodsmash.com. That's our landing website that has links to everything you would need, starting with our podcasting platforms of Spotify, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, Google Play, Apple Podcasts. You can leave us a review. Please subscribe to us. Leave us a review. You can, but I'm asking you to actually do it. Because if you do, we will read it on the show. Live, right here. Your chance to troll us, to lambast us, to lift us up. Whatever you may want to do, we'll be right here, and we promise to read you a review that you leave us. The last review we got was in August of 2020. No one has left a review since, so please go to Apple Podcasts, leave us a review. That helps the algorithms bubble us up. If you want to give us feedback in other facets, we have all of our social media platforms. Again, these links all exist at 80bitpodsmash.com, but we have a Facebook, an Instagram, a Reddit, and a Twitter account, all 80bit Podsmash, 80bit Podsmash. You can find us at any of those platforms. We have a Discord server where our community frequently chats about various things in the gaming industry, and that link is in all of our social media podcasts, as well as our show notes for every single episode that goes live. You can find us at twitch.tv/80bitpodsmash for our news show every Monday night, 8 p.m. Eastern, and our live video game streams Wednesday nights, 8 p.m. Eastern. We both have PlayStation 5s at this point. We're both going to be streaming the things we're excited about. So if you care about next gen, if you care about what the PlayStation 5 has to offer, we will be streaming them regularly on Wednesday nights at 8 p.m. So please join us there. And I don't remember if I've forgotten any other. Oh, we have a YouTube channel where all of our news videos will go live for video on demand consumption. And that link to YouTube is at 80bitpodsmash.com because we're not popular enough to actually have a YouTube channel with a name. So we have a random URL, and that link is at 80bitpodsmash.com. So you can leave comments on YouTube. We are everywhere. And if there is a place you want us to be and we're not there, let us know in one of those ways that we just mentioned, and we will put ourselves there.
Awesome. We have reached the end of our last brainstorming session for episode ideas, so we have a brainstorming session that we are due for. But you can bet that, given it's the holidays, there will be some Christmassy episodes and stuff like that coming up. But in the meantime, we'll leave you hanging for whatever we come up with for next week. And in the meantime, we'll just say Happy Thanksgiving and Happy new next console generation.
Happy Thanksgiving, happy Gen 9. It's going to be fantastic, and we will see you next week.